The truth is, Lyle and Erik were failed by the very people who should have protected them, by their parents, by the system, by society at large. They have grown, they have changed, and they have become better men despite everything that they've been through. It's time to give them the opportunity to live the rest of their lives free from the shadow of their past.
We're here today in downtown Los Angeles, where we just saw scores of people turn out for the Menendez brothers press conference. Although there's no huge update on the case of whether the brothers will be released from prison after more than 30 years, we heard from defense attorney Mark Garrigus, who called it unprecedented that more than 20 members of Kitty and Jose Menendez's family were here to support the cause.
Back in May, we filed a writ of habeas corpus. A judge in this courthouse, Judge William Ryan, issued what's called an informal request for reply. That informal request for reply was to ask the DA to respond to the allegations of new evidence. The other pillar of the writ of habeas corpus was a declaration by Roy Rosello. There is an idea that there is redemption. There is an idea with their green space project of rehabilitation. I will tell you, in over 40 years of doing this, I have never seen the amazing exemplary rehabilitation and mitigation evidence that we have now presented to the DA's office.
We first heard today from Erik and Lyle's cousin, Anna Marie, who appeared confident as she called the brothers victims and explained the terror that the family have been through over the years. She said if the case were to be heard today, things would be very different when it came to sentencing, as people have more understanding of abuse and PTSD.
Like so many others, I struggled to process the events of that fateful August day and the loss that I felt. Over time, it became clear that there were two other victims there on that day, my cousins Lyle and Erik. Lyle and Erik would continue to be victimized. They would be victims of a system that wouldn't hear them. And they would be victims of a culture that was not ready to listen. They would be mocked. They would be called cold-blooded killers, left to rot in jail and denied any hope of redemption. If Lyle and Erik's case were heard today, with the understanding we now have about abuse and PTSD, there is no doubt in my mind that their sentencing would have been very different. And yet, despite their circumstances, they have chosen a life of light. Without hope of release, they persevered. They have sought to better themselves and serve as a support and inspiration for survivors all over the world. Lyle and Erik deserve a chance to heal, and our family deserves a chance to heal with them.
Among the family members to speak today was frail Joan, Kitty Menendez's sister, who said she was nervous and full of emotions. She was helped towards the podium and was one of many family members to speak of their years of suffering and how they are ready for the brothers to finally come home.
Please know that I'm nervous and full of emotions. I never thought this day would come. I am Kitty's sister. I stand here today with a heavy heart and also with hope and justice and understanding. We have received such an outpouring support in recent weeks, which led us to launch this formal initiative. For many years, I struggled with terms with what happened to my sister's family. It was a nightmare none of us could have imagined. But as details of Lyle and Erik's abuse came to light, it became clear that their actions, while tragic, were the desperate response of two boys trying to survive the unspeakable cruelty of their father.
We also heard today from Brian Anderson Jr., Kitty Menendez's nephew, who said the brothers were vilified for their actions and the system failed them. He insisted they are not a threat to society and have been rehabilitated. Meanwhile, other members of the family said that their actions were simply a desperate attempt to stop the abuse they were suffering at the hands of their violent father.
I've known Lyle and Erik my whole life. I can tell you without a doubt that they are not the villains they've been portrayed as. They were boys, young, scared, and abused by their father in ways no child should ever experience. You, the media, focused so much on their actions, but they never were able to tell the full story of their abuse that drove them to such desperate measures. When I think about the pain and suffering they endured, it breaks my heart to know that the system failed them so profoundly. They tried to protect themselves the only way they knew how. But instead of being seen as victims, they were vilified. Their father's abuse was dismissed, their trauma ignored, and their truth mocked by millions.
We also heard today from Kitty Menendez's niece, Karen, who said she'd supported the brothers for years and said it was about time the truth was really told about what was happening to the brothers behind closed doors.
From the beginning, I believed Lyle and Erik were victims of their father's abuse. I grew up knowing and feeling something wasn't right. The feeling in their house and the father-son interactions were just off. But it was not until the first trial that the full horror of what they had to live through came to light. My sister, Diane, had evidence of their abuse. That was not even allowed to be presented at the trial. I cannot help but think of how things would be different if the world had known the truth back then, or if they had been the Menendez sisters. Adults of abuse have difficulty getting out of their situations, and yet these were two young boys who were never allowed to make decisions on their own. They lived in constant fear and were unable to make any other decisions than the sexual violence that they were taught at the very hands of people who were supposed to love and protect them. I believe they have paid for their crimes, and we as a family have all suffered enough. We are here for them and ready to support Erik and Lyle after released. This is a time for truth and justice, and the time for the path to healing. It is time for Erik and Lyle to come home. We are here for them.
After the press conference, they were escorted over to the courthouse, where they would speak to the DA ahead of the hearing next month.